Welcome to Actuary Voices, the podcast from the American Academy of Actuaries. I'm David Nolan, the Academy's Director of Communications. Today, I'm in conversation with Tom Campbell, who's in the middle of his one-year term as President of the American Academy of Actuaries. Tom, I'm delighted to have you on the show.
Thanks. I'm really happy to be here.
We generally start the show by asking guests about their journey towards becoming an actuary. What's yours, Tom? Any bumps along the road?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So in school, elementary school, middle school, high school, I was always good at math. And I went to college as a math major. And I went to Providence College, which is a small liberal arts school in Rhode Island. And they don't have an actuarial program. But I kind of bounced around between math education, computer science. Sometimes I think at one point I switched to a dual major and then back to math. And it really wasn't until my junior year when an alumni who was a friend of mine came back to the school and talked about her career as an actuary. And just hearing about the career really intrigued me. One of the things was the fact that you had to take exams. And I always thought, well, I'm pretty good at taking exams. So I would give that a try. And I was taking a statistics course, and it was kind of an independent study. And the professor, there were only about 3 or 4 people in the class, and he was looking for something to teach or a direction to go in on statistics. And I gave him a copy of all these old Society of Actuary exams, part 2 at the time, and he kind of geared the course towards those exams. So we were kind of creating an actuarial science program at Providence College, and 2 days after the final exam, I sat for part 2 and did well. So.
Sounds great. It's interesting that an awful lot of actuaries, whether they're doing a member spotlight or this podcast or even in general conversation, they talk about the impact or the role that the exams take and how hard they are and how it's important to get them out of the way quickly. Were you you say you were a quick study, but did you get through the exams quickly or did you take your time?
I did. At the time, there were 10 exams. You had to get 5 to get your associateship. And I think my senior year, I think it was part 3, and I didn't have all the materials. And so I just kind of, looked at textbooks on the topics that were involved, and I didn't pass that one. But other than that, I kind of went through all the exams and was successful all the way. So that worked out pretty well for me.
So you graduated school already with a couple of exams under your belt?
I had 2 exams under my belt, and I don't know if it was foolishly, but I thought that I was taking part 3, and I was realizing that what I had studied wasn't what was on the exam, and I was thinking to myself, gee, I wonder if I should continue and do the best I can and guess or take it again, because this is going to be really important for my job. And obviously for the preliminary exams, that's kind of background. That's not exactly what you're doing on the job. So I was a little naive from that point of view.
Well, you clearly recovered. And did you go straight to an actuarial firm or an organization that needed actuaries?
I did, and I was fortunate enough to have a friend whose father was a vice president at the Hartford, and living in Connecticut, that was pretty close to where I lived. And she was able to send my resume to her father, who then had his secretary type it up to make it look a lot nicer than I had it. And I was able to get an internship. At that point, I had 1 exam, and I was sitting for at that point, part 1. I took part 2 first and then part 1, and ended up passing part 1 while I was on the internship. And so, I was able to get to get in for the summer, and I learned a lot. And not just learning about work, getting up in the morning. We had to wear a tie and a suit back then, even during the summer. Doing all that, commuting and all that, but also talking with a lot of the actuaries, the actuarial students, people that were a couple of years older than me, that were going through the exams, and learning how they went about their job, mixing their job with study time and family life and all that. And I ended up spending a lot of time just talking to people about their experiences and learned a lot by doing that.
Yeah, that must have prepped you a lot for your future career. So tell us a little bit more about your career path from interning at the Hartford and to where you are
Well, I
now.
was fortunate enough after interning at the Hartford to be hired as an actuarial student there. And I think part of it was the fact that I played on the softball team and did really well. So I don't know if that helped at all. That seemed to have something to do with it. But and it was a good way of another good way of getting to know people and bonding with people. But I was with the Hartford for over 30 years. And I was fortunate to do that in that, a lot of insurance companies either got bought out by somebody or, went in different directions. The Hartford, they were bought by ITT, but they were kept as an independent, pretty much independent entity, and then later spun off. But it was always the Hartford up until really the end of my career when Hartford spun off their life business and annuity business.
And what did you find most fulfilling about, 30 years is a long time. So you must have found a lot of it fulfilling. But so what did you find most fulfilling about your work?
I think it was two things. I think the interaction with the other people, not just the other actuaries, but other professionals. I spent a lot of time working with government affairs people, attorneys, with accountants, and with senior management, and really getting to know them and working with them and working as a team towards over time many different goals. And I think that's the other thing is really over the course of the 30 years, I worked in a lot of different areas, and there were a lot of changes in the life insurance and annuity industry. And working in that and being part of that was just very fulfilling. And in particular, the Hartford was big in variable annuities, and learning a lot about that business was something that I really enjoyed.
Some people mistakenly see actuaries as being enmeshed in spreadsheets, equations, and numbers all the time. But obviously, your experience shows that's not the case.
Well, obviously, there's that aspect of it, but it's really the application of that, and it's really an application to business. I like to tell the story of one time I proctored an exam, and I think it was part one. And this one woman finished the exam real early, so she handed in her paper. So I was kind of able to look at the questions, and there was one question that dealt with it asked for the minimum of a function over a range. And so the way to do that math-wise is to go in and take the derivative and solve and take those numbers and plug it in and see which one's the minimum. Well, but if it's a minimum over a range, you also have to check the endpoints. So I was looking at that question and I said, well, I don't even have to do the math. I just have to plug in the endpoints. And if that's the minimum of the 5 answers that are there, I'm able to answer that question. And so I that was the case. This woman had gone through the math and forgot the endpoints. And of course, the answer that she got was one of the answers. It was the wrong answer. So it's kind of the analogy is you have to know the math, you have to know the numbers, but you're applying it strategically in a business atmosphere.
Yeah. You're the president of the Academy this year, but when did you start out as a volunteer?
Wow, we were talking about this when I first started. I think you and I were talking about this. I think I went back to as far back as 1992. And, at the time, I was working for someone who was involved in industry work and in the academy work and going to NAIC meetings. And to this day, the NAIC is one of the key audiences of the Life Practice Council at the Academy, and one of the key stakeholders. And my boss at the time, had other things to do, and so he wanted to get me more involved in things. and he kind of helped me get involved. I went to an NAIC meeting, and we flew down to Miami. It was at in Miami. We flew down. He upgraded us to first class. We had a nice dinner on the plane, some wine. Got to the meeting, went to the meeting, and I was like, "Wow, this is great! I like flying in first class." But of course, he had all these miles from doing a couple of work trips to international places and all that, but just the work there kind of got me hooked. I really enjoyed the work with the Academy, and going to the NAIC meetings and seeing how things get developed at the NAIC.
Obviously, a lot of your work involves the NAIC, the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. But I presume you've worked on other committees that are more focused on other areas of the life insurance practice.
Yeah. So in addition to the NAIC, I actually spent a lot of time on a committee. It was an AICPA committee, and they wanted.
Sorry, could you tell folks
certainly.
what the AICPA
Yeah, the American
is?
Institute of Certified Public Accountants. So it was a group of accountants, and they wanted Academy representation. It was an SOP that dealt with GAAP accounting, and it's involved a separate account business, and involved life insurance business, and you wanted someone from the Academy to kind of give that perspective. And so I was at the meeting. We met a couple of times a month in New York City for 2 days. It was at least once a month. And so I would take the train down to New York and meet with a bunch of accountants, and I learned a lot and really made a lot of great contacts there. And I did also have the opportunity to talk to their executive board, as well as the FASB, the Federal Accounting Standards Board. And so I got to kind of branch out from kind of the actuarial work. In addition, I also had the opportunity to go to Japan and talk to the regulator in Japan, the FSA, as well as the Institute of Actuaries of Japan, and to present what we were doing in the United States for variable annuities. And that was very interesting. It was quite an experience. Flying to Japan. I think I went on at least 3 different occasions.
A not insignificant amount of Academy volunteer work seems to be spent assisting other organizations where they might not have relevant expertise.
Yeah, I think that's an important part of our work, because we're, one of the things we're there is to help with the formation of public policy, and we need to provide that analysis and that information that helps with that. And, I think being viewed as an independent organization and an objective organization is very important, and to maintain that independence and objectivity is really an important part of the Academy mission.
This year, you're the president of the American Academy of Actuaries, and you're about halfway through your presidency now. High points so far?
Well, the high point is working with all the people and being able to interact with the board members and the members of the Academy. I've had opportunities to speak to several groups. Just last week, I talked to the Philadelphia Actuarial Club. I also had opportunity to speak with the University of Connecticut actuarial group, and that was a very interesting experience. So those are 2 examples. Kind of the downside, though, is not being able to meet people in person and just spending a lot of time on Zoom meetings. And in particular, it's been a challenge for the board because we're meeting on Zoom. We're hoping that by the end of the year we're able to meet in person, but that's still that's still something we're looking at. I kind of spoke with the executive committee, which is made up of a lot of the vice presidents, and the vice presidents at the Academy have a 2-year term. And so 3 of the vice presidents started their term in November of 2019, and We had one meeting, which was really more of an orientation meeting in person. And then after that, we started meeting virtually. So that group of vice presidents has not met in person. They may end up going their entire term with just that one meeting, unless we are able to do a meeting later this year. So,
well, let's hope we and they are able to meet in person. I think you're right that the lack of in-person meetings has had a significant impact on everyone's ability to not just to do work, but to interact on a personal as well as a professional level. Moving back to look again at your career, something I've noticed in speaking with actuaries over the years is that a lot of attention is placed on dealing with ethical quandaries that emerge along the way and how you and others deal with them. So is there anything in your professional life that you'd like to draw out and think you look back and you say, oh, yes, I dealt with that pretty well, or no, I dealt with that terribly?
Well, there were always situations where, I worked as a corporate actuary and for a while worked as an appointed actuary. And so I, for the most part, either had direct final say on reserves for the company, or the person who did either worked for me or was my boss, and I supported that. So there were a lot of situations where I like to refer to it as that pesky CFO who wants to challenge, and that's their job, to challenge it. So it's not like they're doing something unethical. But there were times where I got some major pushbacks to kind of take shortcuts and to do things that didn't make sense, and often would get hear from my CFO saying, well, I was talking to the CFO of this other company and they do it this way. And, how come you do it that, how come our actuaries are doing it this way? And my response was always, well, because you've got smarter actuaries than the other person does. It was hardly ever kind of a conflict. It was really more of a discussion, a very serious discussion. And but in the end, I would always explain what we were doing and why we were doing it. And I think the CFO in general, would be very respectful of that, and especially if it was a CPA, understood the ethics that we have and the standards that we have, and so I was fortunate enough to be able to work through those situations.
Looking forward and taking a peek into your crystal ball, do you see any ethical challenges in the future that bear paying attention to?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the one thing that's getting a lot of attention is artificial intelligence and the use of data and algorithms and kind of the biases that are in there, and being able to meet those challenges. And I know there are academy groups that are looking at those issues and are working with regulators and others and the public and the actual profession to try to deal with those issues. I think that's something that's going to be with us, going forward. Other things like principle-based reserves, the long-term care, not just reserves, but the pricing, pensions, certainly. Particularly, multi-employer pension plans and public pension plans as well, are all issues that we're dealing with as an academy and as a profession. And I think we have that mission and we have that infrastructure in place to be able to deal with that. But it makes being viewed as independent and objective that much more important for us, as an academy.
Something I've noticed under your presidency is the academy is paying an awful lot more attention to diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. Is that something that you initiated, or is it something that you think is long overdue?
Well, I think I think it is something that's long overdue, and I don't view it as I initiated any of this. This is something that has been developing over time and will continue to develop. We're not even done. I know we've looked at not just from a public policy perspective, and we are doing a lot on the public policy perspective, but also from a professionalism perspective. Right now, we're looking at potential modifications to the U.S. qualification standards for actuaries, and there are some issues there that deal with diversity and equity. But as well as an academy, looking at our committees as our our committees, our practice councils, our boards. Are we diverse enough? And I don't think we are. I think that's something that we have to continue to work on, and it's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's going to take a lot of time and a lot of effort from everyone. I think that's important. Also, from the profession, the academy isn't really the on-ramp for the profession. So our members come from folks who have gotten their credentials from other actuarial organizations, such as the Society of Actuaries and the Casualty Actuarial Society. And so those organizations seem to be doing a really good job of setting goals, and we need to help support that, but also work on our own to do things to promote the profession so that it's, we know it's available to all people, even people that are in underserved groups.
Important work indeed, absolutely. You're coming up on 30 years as an academy volunteer. Do you volunteer in other areas of your life?
I do. I try to get involved in a lot of things, at my church, or, around the town. One of the things that I spend most of my time on when I'm not doing actuarial work is I'm on the board of a organization that does charitable work in Haiti. It's called Outreach to Haiti. What we do there is we work through the Archdiocese of Port-au-Prince, and we provide a clinic for health care. We work with students and supporting them in education. We work with nutrition programs, and we're actually in a situation where we can see where we're changing lives, saving lives, and changing lives as well. So there may be some malnutrition infants that come into our clinic that we're able to bring back to health. But Haiti is a very poor country, but the people there are amazing. And the first time I visited there, it was heartbreaking to see the conditions, but then to meet the people and just see their outlook on life, their faith, their welcomeness, they're very welcoming, was just amazing. And just seeing the needs that are there. For instance, here in the United States, we brag about, and rightfully so, we brag about how many people are being vaccinated for COVID-19. Yet in Haiti, I read an article where it started off by saying not one of the 11 million people in Haiti have received a vaccination. And there's a lot of issues, a lot of reasons for that. But that is something that we can't. I can't turn a blind eye to.
It sounds like very important work, Tom, and thanks for taking it on. I hesitate to ask you the next question, but it's what do you do for fun? If you have any time for that.
I do. I do try to find time. Obviously, exercise is important, and one of the things I like to do is to ride my bike. And I used to say I only ride my bike when the weather's nice, but with COVID-19, I started to kind of bend that rule and try to get out as much as I can, even when the weather isn't nice. I still live in Connecticut, and so the weather isn't always cooperative. But yeah, I like to go on rides. Sometimes long rides, sometimes short rides. I like to explore different areas, even travel to places to do some bike rides, either by myself or I got my wife involved in it as well, so that it's a fun thing we can do together.
And have you ever thought about competing in races?
Absolutely not. No. I like to get on the bike and ride. I don't want to, compete with others. I know our good friend Joff Williams, who's the immediate past president, used to do that, and he tells me how painful it was and how much work it is to do that. And my daughter-in-law asked me that at one point. Well, why don't you race with other people? I was like, well, no, I just want to ride.
I'm with you, Tom. I'm with you, definitely. I've seen my friends who ride competitively against other people, and they more often have more bandages on than bare skin.
That's another part of it as well, yeah.
As I said earlier, you're halfway through your 1-year term as president. Mary Ellen Coggins is the next president. Have you any advice for her?
One advice is it's not going to be exactly what you expected it to be, But Mary Ellen is very much involved in the day-to-day. I speak with her a lot, and I like to tell people I've learned as much from her about being president than I've learned from anyone else, and so I think the Academy is going to be in really good hands from the presidential side of things, going forward. My advice is to just talk to as many different people as possible, seek input, and but ultimately, when a decision has to be made, you got to make that decision, and you can't look back.
Sound advice, indeed. Tom, thank you very much. I was speaking with Tom Campbell, President of the American Academy of Actuaries. This is Actuary Voices, and my name is David Nolan, Director of Communications at the American Academy of Actuaries. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe to our podcast on your preferred podcast platform and watch out for future episodes.